He handed me a glass of wine and kissed my cheek 30 minutes after texting our neighbor. Can't wait to see you tonight. Our little secret, right? I smiled back, knowing what he didn't. Tonight, in front of everyone he loves, I'd burn his perfect life to the ground with the truth. I never thought a single notification could shatter my entire world, not dramatically, like a thunderclap, but quietly, like glass cracking under slow pressure. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes after dinner, the soft hum of the exhaust fan overhead, the only sound. The granite countertop was cool beneath my hands. And I wondered for a moment whether the centerpiece I was planning for our 10th anniversary would be eucalyptus or peonies. It was such a normal Thursday evening. Then a familiar chime from Jason's phone on the island, and everything changed in that instant. I looked up, curious but not alarmed. He was in the shower upstairs, the rhythmic patter of water masking the world. I wiped my hands on a towel and crossed the kitchen to grab it, then paused. On the lock screen was a message preview. Can't wait for tonight. Our little secret, right? The sender displayed simply as neighbor. My breath caught. The words seemed small and casual, but the meaning behind them was seismic. I leaned in closer but forced myself to step back. What if I was misreading it? What if these were silly arrangements for a night out? Nothing more than a blogger's night or potluck details, all innocuous. I had to know. My fingers traced his phone case, hesitating over the screen. It felt wrong, like picking up someone else's mail, but I unlocked it anyway. The passcode was our wedding anniversary. Numbers I thought were symbols of love became the key to betrayal. I pressed in and opened the message app. What I found there, hidden beneath polite holiday arrangements and friendly check-ins, was months of secret communication, flirtatious banter, weekend rendezvous planned while I thought he was on business trips, photos of a smiling woman in our backyard so intimate he'd taken them himself, in his car, in moments he'd taken from our marriage. Each screenshot, each text message was a blow to my chest. This wasn't a lone mistake. It was a pattern, an alternate life unfolding alongside ours. Her name was Melissa. She and her boyfriend Matt had moved in next door 6 months ago. She was the kind of neighbor I envied, warm, friendly, always bringing over brownies or offering to water my plants. I had welcomed her, I had smiled, I had trusted, and while I washed his coffee mugs each morning, I had no idea this woman was planning secret dinners with the man I loved. Our little secret, they called it. The irony was as sharp as broken glass. Silence flooded the kitchen. My pulse pounded like footsteps in an empty house. I closed the app, set the phone back on the island, and watched it vibrate again. Another notification from Melissa, with an emoji-laced reply from Jason. I wanted to scream. I wanted to confront them, to claw at their secrets until they bled truth. But I didn't. I stood still, as calm as marble. As the storm built inside, I traced a shaky inhale, brushed a fragment of granite with my fingertip, and realized something crucial. I still had power in that moment. I could let him catch me unraveling, shatter him with the rawness of my emotions. I could confront them now and ruin everything in a rage. But what would that accomplish? Their betrayal was emotional violence, a slow burn that had stacked strain upon strain until the whole thing collapsed in that single message. If I exploded with tears and anger, I'd give them the satisfaction. I wouldn't waste a moment or myself on his realization. I wiped my hands again and took a step back. The phone lay there, unprotected. Upstairs, the shower slowed, then stopped. One footstep on the stairs. Two, my heart slowed, my mind sharpened. When Jason stepped into the kitchen, wrapped in a towel, and humming a note he couldn't hit, I forced a smile so perfect he barely noticed. That little flicker behind my eyes, the tremor in my hands, that was all the sincerity he got from me. Almost ready, he asked, reaching for a glass of water before heading out to change. I'll be down in a minute, I lied, voice unsteady but controlled. He didn't notice. He never looked. I watched him go, heard the basement door click shut as he went to change into something for our supposed anniversary dinner. He still believed everything was normal. He still believed I couldn't see behind the mask. I told myself I'd let that belief remain intact because I needed him to walk into that darkness blind. As the front door clicked shut and I heard his car pull into the driveway, I allowed myself a single exhale, a whisper in my own mind. No. Everything will be revealed soon. This is just the beginning. I walked back to the island, my palms pressed against the cold stone. I lifted his phone and opened the Messages app again. I saved every screenshot. I copied the metadata. I opened the iCloud backups and resurrected deleted conversations. I recorded the times. I traced every false meeting and masked insult. You're too uptight. You take things too seriously. I just needed a break. Each phrase felt like a punch, but each one also became a building block for what would come. I closed the phone and tucked it into my pocket. I left the kitchen, the wood floor cool beneath my bare feet. My reflection followed me in the glass of the patio door. Rachel from our first apartment would have wept at the sitai, was quietly composed, mid-20s, naive, hopeful. Emma today was different. Emma today had seen everything and felt everything and decided she would do justice in her own way. Not instant, not frenzied, but devastating, precise, elegant, unforgettable. I passed the calendar on the fridge, circled July 18th in red ink, 10th anniversary. A decade buried under kindness, laughter, the occasional argument, but never trust broken like this. I slid a piece of paper behind the circle. Project anniversary. It would start at 6 p.m. It would end in truth. It would be the night he'd never forget. The rest of the week passed in a blur. I pretended nothing had changed. I planned menus. I auditioned wines. I sifted through candles. I even bought a projector disguised as part of a ceiling lamp. It was my backstage crew, my final performance waiting to happen. And every time I polished that plan, clarity filled me like a cool breeze cutting through heat. He asked me 3 nights ago why I'd been distant. He said he felt something was off. I said I was tired, stressed with work. But beneath the tiredness came a deeper truth. Before the night I had scheduled for our return to reality, I would ask people to stop to watch, because in the theater of his betrayal, I imagined a crowd. My friends, my family, even neighbors, whose trust he'd taken for granted. And I would pull back the curtain, because this story isn't about humiliation, it's about justice. If you're hooked by this beginning, hit subscribe. I'm dropping new stories every week, each one more real, more intense, and absolutely unforgettable. Your support keeps them coming, and I've got plenty more waiting. Quiz time. Which would you do if you discovered a secret affair? A. Confront them immediately in a blowout confrontation. B. Stay calm, collect proof, and expose later in a controlled way. Drop your answer or be in the comments below. I'll follow up with your most common choice in the next video. Silence has a sound. You don't hear it at first, not in the way you notice a slammed door or a raised voice, but once it takes hold, it settles into your bones. That was what the days following my discovery felt like. Not chaos, not anger, just a deafening silence. Every morning I woke up beside a man I now knew was betraying me, and I smiled. I kissed him on the cheek. I made him coffee. And all the while, that silence hummed beneath the surface like static before a storm. I had spent a decade building a life with Jason, 10 years of birthdays, anniversaries, grocery lists, mortgages, and lazy Sunday mornings filled with small talk and warm coffee. I'd believed we were safe in the monotony of love, that our comfort was proof of something solid. But love built on false promises is like a house built on sand. And when I found that message, that one cruel, simple message, it wasn't just trust that broke, it was time. The past 10 years unraveled in seconds. Memories suddenly poisoned with doubt. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even allow myself the luxury of falling apart. I didn't want rage. I wanted clarity. And when you shift your thinking from pain to purpose, something inside you hardens, becomes sharp, focused. That's where I lived for the next several days. Not in grief, but in a cold, strategic place that felt both foreign and necessary. I began with the evidence. I didn't just screenshot the messages, archived them. I made copies, encrypted them, backed them up in cloud storage and again on a hard drive tucked inside the back panel of my office bookshelf. I downloaded images, exported voice notes, and traced phone call logs. Every digital trace of their affair became a puzzle piece I stored carefully, methodically, emotionlessly. Each file was labeled, timestamped, categorized. It wasn't paranoia, it was precision. I knew that when the time came, I wouldn't just expose them, I would bury them in their own words. But digital proof wasn't enough. I remembered an old app Jason used to back up his phone to his laptop. I waited until he left one morning and accessed his system. In one buried folder, I found deleted messages he probably thought were gone forever. Things they'd said to each other when the affair was still young and messy, before it had settled into its current smug rhythm. One message, dated over 7 months back, made my breath catch. He told her he sometimes looked at me and felt nothing. That he stayed because it was easier than starting over. That he appreciated how low maintenance I'd become. I read those words with a kind of detached horror, not because they were cruel, but because they were so casual. Even worse were the recordings. I'd remembered an old voice-activated recorder tucked in the back of a drawer in our laundry room, a gift from my father when I was in college, back when I thought I'd become a journalist. I dusted it off, charged it, and planted it beneath the passenger seat of Jason's car. Within 48 hours, I had 2 hours of audio. Phone calls, voice memos, even him humming in the car. But then came the jackpot of 5-minute conversation with Melissa on speakerphone. They joked about the performance he'd put on at dinner the night before. He mimicked my voice. She laughed. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until the recorder clicked off. I sat on the floor of our bedroom, back pressed to the bed frame, that silence louder than ever. The anger was there now, pulsing beneath the surface, but I refused to let it take the wheel. I had seen too many women lose everything in the heat of fury. No, I would not burn myself for their sins. I would not be the one screaming on the lawn. While they whispered about how unhinged I'd become, I would be quiet. I would be terrifying. I scheduled a consultation with a divorce attorney in downtown Portland. I didn't tell her everything, just enough. She listened carefully, her expression unreadable, then handed me a list of documents to begin gathering. Tax returns, joint bank account statements, investment portfolios. I nodded, already ahead of her. I had been downloading those for 2 days. Then, something I had nearly forgotten surfaced: my inheritance. 10 years ago, when Jason was struggling to launch his tech consulting firm, I had invested a large portion of my grandmother's estate into the company. We had signed an informal agreement, 1 page, notarized by a friend of his, stating that if the company dissolved or if we separated, the original investment would be returned with a small percentage of interest. He had never spoken of it again, but I'd stored the original document in a safe deposit box downtown. I retrieved it the next morning and took it to my attorney. Her eyes lit up when she read it. "This changes everything," she said, and it did. That single piece of paper gave me leverage, legal, financial, undeniable leverage. Still, the most surprising part of those days wasn't the planning. It was the shift in how I saw Jason. He became smaller, not physically, of course, but spiritually. His words, once filled with power, now felt flimsy. His gestures, once charming, now reeked of performance. I began to watch him the way one observes a stranger, curious, removed, analytical. I noticed how he flinched when his phone buzzed, how he avoided eye contact when I brought up the anniversary dinner. He wasn't a monster. He was something worse, a coward in a well-pressed suit. And Melissa, my sweet, laughing neighbor. Every morning, she waved from her porch, called out compliments about my garden. I smiled back. But inside, I was already writing her eulogies. She had chosen complicity. She had known I was his wife, known we were planning an anniversary. She had inserted herself anyway. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. There was one night, about a week before the dinner, when Jason stood behind me in the kitchen, arms around my waist. He kissed the top of my head and said, 10 years, Em? Can you believe it? I looked at the reflection of us in the microwave door. My expression was still. His eyes, over my shoulder, looked so proud, so sure. I smiled. No, I can't, I said, but what I really meant was, no. I can't believe I ever thought you were enough. Because by then, I knew something I didn't, single quotes. The dinner wasn't for celebration, it was for revelation. It started with a guest list. On the surface, it was innocent. A small dinner party, just close friends and family, to celebrate 10 years of marriage. A decade of love, commitment, perseverance, or at least. That's how it would look. That's how it needed to look. The deception had to be dressed in elegance. Jason had no reason to suspect anything. He was too wrapped up in his own self-image, too confident that he still held the mask of the faithful husband. So when I suggested inviting Melissa and her boyfriend Matt to the dinner, his reaction was subtle but revealing. His eyes flicked up for the briefest second, then down again. "Are you sure?" he asked, feigning nonchalance. "I mean, it's our anniversary, shouldn't it be? A little more private?" I smiled at him like I always did. "Come on, they've been nothing but kind. It'd be rude not to include them." He paused, just long enough to tell me everything. I needed to know. That hesitation was confirmation. But he couldn't refuse, not without revealing his nerves. "Okay," he said finally, the word catching ever so slightly in his throat. "If you think it's a good idea." I didn't just think it was a good idea. I knew it was perfect. What followed were days of meticulous planning, under the guise of a devoted wife, preparing the most memorable evening of their marriage. I sent out the invitations with handwritten notes, carefully curated menus, wine pairings, and a mood board of tablescapes I shared with my friends in a group chat. No one suspected anything. They saw a woman in love, devoted, excited to celebrate a milestone, and I played the part so well. Even I sometimes had to remind myself what I was truly preparing. I ordered candles ivory taper with gold leaf accents. I picked up flowers from a boutique florist in the Pearl District. Pale roses, eucalyptus, hydrangeas. I tested 3 kinds of lamb for the main course before settling on a rosemary garlic rub Jason had always loved. I selected music-soft classical pieces, Bach and Satie, the kind that felt timeless and weightless but carried an undercurrent of tension. I spent hours setting the table, folding napkins with surgical precision, lighting test candles to check for smoke drift. Every detail mattered, but the most important part wasn't the food or the ambience. It was the reveal. And for that, needed something subtle and precise. I purchased a ceiling light fixture that doubled as a projector. It arrived in plain packaging, sleek and unassuming. Jason helped me install it, laughing about my obsession with Pinterest-worthy aesthetics. He had no idea what he was screwing into our ceiling. I tested it for days, timing the slides, adjusting brightness, syncing it with the remote hidden inside a decorative clutch I'd leave by my seat. Every image, every message, every recording was formatted perfectly, organized in a silent presentation that would play across the far dining room wall or gallery of lies, framed in flickering candlelight. I also invited Matt personally. We'd only spoken a handful of times before, small talk over mailboxes, a few shared jokes at a block party. He seemed kind, a little awkward, earnest in the way of people who still believed the world was mostly good. I felt a strange guilt, inviting him into a war he didn't know he was part of. But I reminded myself, he deserved the truth too. He wasn't just a pawn, he was collateral the same way I had been. And I wouldn't let him remain in the dark a moment longer than I had. The week leading up to the dinner passed in a blur of rehearsed laughter and clenched teeth. Jason seemed oddly relaxed, even affectionate. He brought home flowers one night, Gilo lilies, my least favorite tanned. I thanked him anyway. He said he couldn't wait to see my dress. He mentioned how proud he was of us. I watched him say those things with studied detachment, noting the way his eyes didn't quite meet mine. He was trying, but not because he loved me. Because he needed to convince himself he still held control. I, on the other hand, had never been more in control. The night before the dinner, I stood in the dining room long after Jason had gone to bed. The table was set, the candles were placed, the projector blinked quietly above me, waiting. I walked around the space, imagining each guest in their seat, imagining the silence when the first image appeared. I practiced my smile in the hallway mirror, not too wide, not too bitter, calm/measured, perfectly composed. I wasn't just planning a dinner, I was directing a play. One final act where all the roles were cast, the lines already written, and the ending inevitable. That night, as I lay beside him in bed, I listened to his breathing, slow and even. I wondered if he dreamt of her, if he even felt guilt anymore. I doubted it. People like Jason don't feel remorse. They feel inconvenience. They feel fear when they're caught, but not guilt. He had always been good at telling himself stories, always been the hero of his own narrative. What I was about to do would destroy that illusion. And still, I didn't hate him. Hate would have been too simple, too passionate. What I felt was colder. Like watching a flame you once loved flicker out. Like stepping out of a home you'd once adored and realizing it had never really been yours. I spent the morning of the dinner finalizing everything. My hair was done in soft curls, pinned loosely at the side. I wore a dress Jason had given me on our 7th anniversary, champagne silk. Low back, subtle shimmer. He told me I looked breathtaking. I thanked him. Guests began arriving around 6. Laughter filled the foyer. The scent of wine and roast lamb filled the air. Jason beamed beside me, shaking hands, making toasts. Melissa arrived just after 7, arm in arm with Matt. She wore a deep green dress, the kind that clings in all the right places. Her eyes flicked toward Jason the moment she entered, a flash of something silent and charged. He gave her a tiny nod, barely perceptible. I saw it. I saw everything. I welcomed her warmly, almost too warmly. Matt smiled and handed me a bottle of red. He said he was excited to finally spend more time with us. I thanked him sincerely. I was, because he, like me, deserved to see the truth. Dinner moved slowly, each course a measured step toward the inevitable. Jason told stories. Melissa laughed. Our friends complimented the meal. I listened, responded, filled glasses. I smiled so much, my jaw ached, and all the while, above us, the projector. Waited. So did I. The moment I had envisioned for weeks arrived, not with a bang, but with the soft clinking of dessert forks and the hum of background music fading into silence. Coffee had just been served. The guests, relaxed and pleasantly full, had settled into their seats with that familiar after-dinner lull. The candles flickered along the length of the table, casting long, shifting shadows on the walls. Everything was exactly as I had planned. Jason stood, glass in hand, a proud grin spreading across his face. "To 10 years," he said, voice warm and just slightly slurred from the wine. "To my beautiful wife, the love of my life, the woman who has stood by me through everything." I couldn't imagine doing life with anyone else. I met his eyes across the table, held his gaze, and returned his smile. But mine was not the smile of a woman in love. It was the smile of someone who had already buried the illusion. "Thank you, darling," I said softly, letting the words linger in the air. "I couldn't imagine doing life without you either, or without all the fascinating things I've recently discovered." There was a ripple of confusion around the table. A few guests shifted in their seats. Jason's smile faltered, just slightly. Melissa looked up from her coffee, eyes narrowing. Matt glanced from her to me, unsure of what he was witnessing. I reached down to the clutch at my side, retrieved the small remote nestled inside, and pressed the first button. The lights dimmed, automatically the projector above us humming quietly to life. The wall behind Jason lit up with the first image. A screenshot of a text message. "Can't wait for tonight. Our little secret, right?" His name above, Melissa's below. A soft, collective gasp spread through the room like the first crack of thunder before a storm. Jason turned, slowly, as though trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Melissa froze. Matt sat forward in his chair, mouth slightly open. I clicked again. Another message. Then another. Then a photo of Jason's face, taken in the mirror of his car. A smirk on his lips. Sent to Melissa with a caption I had memorized word for word. "Wish you were in this seat instead." Jason stood now, voice strained. "Emma, what is this? What the hell are you doing?" I remained seated, my hand steady on the remote, telling the truth. "You told me this dinner was about celebration." I agreed. "But truth deserves to be part of that celebration, don't you think?" He started toward me. "Stop this. We can talk about this. Sit down, Jason," I said, my voice low but firm. "We'll all talk together." Matt stood slowly, turning to Melissa. "Is this real?" he asked, his voice breaking on the last word. She didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the screen, her face drained of all color. I clicked again. More messages. More photos. I didn't narrate them. I didn't need to. They spoke for themselves. MOS of betrayal. Shared secrets. Insults behind my back. Pet names. Lies. Plans made while I cooked dinner, just a room away. "I thought I was crazy," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "For months, I thought I was paranoid. Overreacting, misreading the signs. Jason told me I worked too much, that I was distant, that I was imagining things, but I wasn't. I saw it. I just didn't want to believe it." Jason stepped toward me again, this time pleading. "Emma, please, don't do this here. Not like this. We can go home, we can talk." I stood now to meeting him eye to eye. "We are home, and we are talking." Finally, Melissa tried to speak, but Matt cut her off, his voice shaking with disbelief. "How long?" he asked. "How long has this been going on?" Silence. "Melissa." He said her name again, and this time she managed to whisper, "Since January." He stepped back, his hands at his sides, fingers twitching as though reaching for something invisible to hold on to. Then, to no one in particular, he said, "I bought her an engagement ring last week." The room was still. Someone at the far end gasped. A chair creaked. Jason looked like a man unraveling, his composure slipping with each passing second. "You've made your point," he spat. "You've embarrassed me. Congratulations. Are you proud of yourself?" I tilted my head. "This isn't about pride. It's about honesty. Something you never gave me. Something you never gave her." And then I pressed one last button. The recording began to play. Jason's voice, low and intimate, recorded in his car. He was talking to Melissa. "She has no idea. She still thinks I'm in love with her. God, she's so predictable. Always working, always trying to prove herself. It's exhausting. But you're my escape." The voice cut off suddenly, and the room fell into stunned silence. It felt like the air had been vacuumed out, like we were all waiting for someone to speak, to scream, to sob. No one did. Jason sat down, his face in his hands. Melissa remained frozen, her eyes locked on the table. Matt was already walking toward the door. I turned back to the table, to the faces around me, friends, family, neighbors, all of them watching this spectacle unravel in real time. I invited you all here because I believed that anniversaries should be about truth. And the truth is, I've been living a lie I didn't create. But tonight, it ends. Tonight, I take my life back. There were no cheers, no applause, just the sound of breath, of shifting bodies, of people processing what they'd seen. Then I raised my glass not to Jason, not to our marriage, but to myself. To 10 years, I said, and to never wasting another day. And I drank alone, while the rest of them sat in stunned silence. The aftermath of that night wasn't fire and screaming, it was quiet devastation. The kind that doesn't announce itself with shattered plates or slammed doors, but settles slowly, methodically, like ash drifting down after a blaze. There was no triumph in the silence that followed, just clarity, just the sound of truth finally finding its voice. Jason didn't sleep in our bed that night. I didn't ask where he went. I didn't care. The next morning, the house was eerily still. No music, no humming, no scent of his cologne trailing behind him in the hallway. Just me, the ticking of the clock on the mantel, and the fading echo of a marriage that had already died long before the projector flickered on. He returned home briefly to collect some clothes and a few files from his home office. He didn't speak. His eyes didn't meet mine. He walked like a man stripped bare, like someone who'd been caught naked in front of an audience that mattered. He tried to leave with dignity, but there's no dignity in lies exposed so publicly. There's only defeat. The fallout happened quickly after that. My lawyer moved with precision. The evidence I had compiled, messages, recordings, documentation of my financial contributions, formed an airtight case. The agreement we had signed years earlier about my investment in his company, something he'd likely forgotten even existed, became a sword I wielded without hesitation. The board of his firm was notified. The clause was enforced. His position was terminated within the week. Word spread fast in his industry. His name, once spoken with respect in boardrooms, became a cautionary whisper in corners. Reputations take years to build and seconds to destroy. Melissa, I heard, moved out within days. Whether it was shame, anger, or the weight of a life unraveled, I never knew. Her boyfriend, ex-boyfriend, I should say, left her at her parents' house and never looked back. I didn't follow their story beyond that. I had no interest in what became of them. Their consequences were their own. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly clean. Jason didn't fight. Maybe he knew he couldn't. Maybe he simply didn't have the strength anymore. We reached a settlement that was more than fair to me financially, legally, and personally. I walked away with everything that mattered. Not just money or assets, but something far more valuable. My dignity, my identity, my peace. But healing wasn't instant. It never is. In the weeks that followed, I found myself standing in rooms that felt unfamiliar, despite their familiarity. The dining room, where the reveal had happened once, my favorite space in the house, became something of a shrine to truth. I didn't avoid it. I sat there often, replaying the evening, not out of regret, but to remind myself of what I'd survived. I began to redecorate, not out of necessity, but out of reclamation. I painted the walls a deeper shade, replaced the table, took down the photos of us, and filled the shelves with books, plants, and memories that belonged solely to me. The business I had once built quietly on the side, dismissed by Jason as my little creative outlet, became my sanctuary. I poured myself into it, not as a distraction, but as a declaration. I expanded my product line, reached out to new vendors, rebranded. Customers noticed the shift, so did I. It wasn't just a brand that was reborn, it was me. There were still hard days. Days when I caught myself setting out 2 coffee cups instead of 1, or instinctively reaching for my phone to share a thought before remembering there was no one on the other end anymore. There were nights when the bed felt too large, when the silence crept in like fog. But those moments became less frequent, less sharp. The ache turned to understanding. The scar thickened into strength. People around me reacted in different ways. Some reached out with sympathy, offering kind words, and others avoided me, unsure of what to say, uncomfortable with the magnitude of what I'd done. But the ones who mattered, the ones who truly knew me, stood firm. They didn't see me as a woman scorned. They saw me as a woman who had taken back her power, who had rewritten the end of a story everyone thought they knew. I ran into Jason once, months later, at a grocery store not far from our old house. He looked thinner, older. His eyes were tired. When he saw me, he hesitated, perhaps expecting anger or bitterness. I gave him neither. I simply nodded and walked past him. There was nothing left to say. He was a ghost from a life I no longer lived. People asked if I felt vindicated. If the public reveal, the financial fallout, the disgrace he endured, if all of it made me feel better. And the truth is, no. It didn't make me happy to watch someone suffer, even if they'd wronged me. But it did make me feel clean. There's a difference between revenge and justice. Revenge is about inflicting pain. Justice is about restoring balance. What I did was never about hurting him. It was about showing him, everyone else, that I wouldn't be quiet, that I wouldn't let betrayal be the last word in my story. Today, my home feels different. Lighter, freer. I've started over, not in a dramatic way. Not with a new city or a new man or some forced reinvention, but in subtle, powerful ways. I cook meals for one. I wake up early. I take long walks. I read more. I host quiet dinner parties where laughter fills the spaces once filled with doubt. I see myself now clearly, wholly for the first time in years. The woman who stood in that dining room, remote in hand, surrounded by the wreckage of a 10-year lie. That woman wasn't broken. She was reborn, and when people ask me if I'd do it all again, I say yes. Not because I wanted it to happen, not because I enjoyed it, but because it taught me who I was. It taught me that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it plans. Sometimes it waits for the perfect moment, and then, when it speaks, it changes everything. Some stories don't end in apology or reunion. Some end in truth, in clarity, in peace. Mine ended in all three. And from that ending, I wrote the beginning of something entirely new. When trust is shattered, it doesn't just break a relationship, breaks the mirror we used to see ourselves. In the aftermath of betrayal, we're left staring into pieces, unsure which parts still belong to us and which were only ever reflections of someone else's lies. What this story reveals isn't just the cruelty of infidelity, but the quiet power of resilience. It's about finding your voice again in the silence, standing tall, not in rage, but in resolve. It's about discovering that you don't need to scream to be heard. You only need to speak your truth with clarity and courage. The woman at the center of this story wasn't superhuman. She was just someone who refused to be erased. She didn't react blindly. She responded intelligently. She didn't let pain define her. She used it to forge something stronger. Her revenge wasn't destruction, it was revelation. She didn't just expose a man and a mistress. She reclaimed her narrative, her dignity, her son. That's a power so many people underestimate, the ability to hold your pain in your hands. Examine it, and then use it as fuel to rebuild a life that no longer includes those who tried to diminish you. The beauty of this story lies in its transformation. From shock to clarity, from heartbreak to strategy, from silence to revelation, it shows us that some of the most powerful acts of justice happen without raising your voice, only by raising the truth. And perhaps the greatest victory of all was that she didn't just survive, she grew. She turned the dining room where she was betrayed into a space of strength. She turned financial manipulation into financial independence. She turned a story of deceit into one of renewal. The lesson here is profound. When someone tries to discard you, devalue you, or diminish you, the most powerful thing you can do is not crumble. It's to rise in silence and let the truth do the speaking. You don't have to match cruelty with cruelty. You can match it with calm, intelligence, and precision. And how can we apply this to our own lives? By remembering that emotional intelligence is not weakness, it's strength. By trusting our instincts, gathering facts before reactions, and standing up for ourselves in ways that protect our peace, not just our pride. In our friendships, relationships, and careers, this approach can transform betrayal into breakthrough. Now, let me ask you, have you ever chosen to walk away quietly and let the truth speak for itself instead of confronting someone in anger? A. Yes, I believe silence can be stronger than confrontation. B. No. I believe facing things head-on is the only way. Please share your answer in the comments. I'd love to know how you view these moments of truth, and your experiences might help someone else who's facing the same decision. And if you found this story powerful, insightful, or even healing in some way, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter, stories that remind us of the strengths we often forget we have.